Hi everyone, welcome to the module on control statements where we explore how certain conditions affect the execution of our program. First off, a little bit about Boolean logic. So we've seen many different types of variables till now, and today we're going to talk about binary variables which take one of two values, either true or false. So let's see that in live coding. So we all remember from previous modules about how there are different mathematical operations like less than or equal to, greater than. So here we're going to ask Python to tell us, is 6 greater than 5? So before I actually run the program, let's just talk about the output. So with binary values, we have either true or false being outputted. So in this case, 6 is greater than 5, so we can hypothesize that the value true will be printed. So let's run that and see. And there we go, true indeed. Let's try that again with a different value. This time, let's try and put in a statement that's not true, like 10 less than 9. So Python says false. So with statements like these, you can put in a value or just a statement where you ask Python, hey Python, can you please print to me whether this is true or false? Let's try one last example. And because 11 is indeed equal to 11, it would print true for that. Along with binary variables, we have some things called Boolean operators, and these are things that we use with binary variables. So we have and, or, and not. So if we look at the Venn diagrams on the right, A and B encompasses everything that is in common with A and B. A or B is pretty much everything that A and B have, including everything in common. And A not B is everything that A has that B doesn't have. So let's look at that in action as well. Now let's take some examples for these. So for example, if you're trying to enter a club, you need to be above 18 and have an ID. So let's see how we would code that out. So your age, let's just say, is 18 and has valid ID is true. So this is saying pretty much that your age is 18 and whether you have a valid ID or not, well, that's true. You do have a valid ID. So let's try and print whether we can get into the club or not. Print age greater than or equal to 18. And has valid ID. So you might have noticed that I didn't put an equal true over here because Python immediately assumes that what you're saying here is true. So unless you explicitly say false, Python just assumes that it's true. So let's try and run this. Put some white space in there. That's true. You are above the required age, so you are greater than or equal to 18, and you do have a valid ID. Let's try a different age, such as 15. That's false. So in this case, we have seen that you need to satisfy both these conditions, both age greater than or equal to 18 and having a valid ID in order to get into a club. Now with the OR operator, let's presume that you need your daily fix of coffee and you like both of cappuccino and latte. So you only take one coffee, and so the cafe just needs to have either cappuccino or latte. So it's really similar to English in this case. So let's try and has cappuccino equal, let's just say they do have cappuccino in this case, and has latte as, let's just say they don't have latte. Now let's print. Well, if you need your daily fix, they need to either have cappuccino or have latte. So let's print that out and see how that goes. It's true. They have one of these. They do have cappuccino, which means you do get your daily fix of coffee. Let's try and put cappuccino as false. That's false. Well, you're not going to get your daily dose of coffee because they have neither of those. So in order for the or condition to work, either this needs to be true or the second one needs to be true. And this is the case for multiple conditions. It doesn't just have to be two of them. And finally, not. This is pretty much the simplest of them all, and not just means negate everything that comes after it. So if we have an example, pen equals, let's just say it's red. Now let's ask Python, hey Python, is pen red? Let's see what Python says here. Yep, it is red, it's fine. You've got a red pen. Now let's ask, hey Python, is pen not red? So everything inside the brackets with not is pretty much negated, which is pretty much saying, hey Python, is it true that the pen is not red? So let's try running this, and that's false. Nope, the pen is actually red, so it's false. So the not does take brackets over here, so make sure to put your statements inside the brackets, and it pretty much negates everything that's inside there. So that's Boolean logic. Now let's move on to if statements. If statements is pretty much asking the program to perform some task depending on the value of a condition. So it's like saying, if this is true, then do whatever needs to be done. So let's see that in an example. So let's take back the example of getting into a club. So we are initializing age as 18, has valid ID as true. Now, if the age is greater than or equal to 18 and has valid ID is true, then tell them, welcome to the club. So, a few things to note here. There is an indentation of 4 spaces or 1 tab before the print, and that's pretty much like saying that whatever is indented is actually part of the if statement. And the colon over here is saying that everything afterwards, which is indented, is going to be part of the if statement. And that pretty much means that all of this is only going to be executed if the condition here is satisfied. So let's just run that and see, welcome to the club. And at the very end, let's just print, thanks for coming, and run that again. So welcome to the club and thanks for coming. Now, if their age is less than 18, it just skips everything that is inside the print statement. It just doesn't execute that. So if this condition is not satisfied, it just skips whatever is indented over here and continues execution from the next statement, which is this one, which is why only this one has been printed. Now, we saw before that there was really no way to tell people that they couldn't be let in. All we could just do was just say thanks for coming. And this is where the else statement comes in. So everything that cannot go into the if statement comes into the else statement. So the else statement is where you have your program execute if the variables were unable to satisfy the if conditions. So let's get back to the same example. Now, let's imagine that we actually want to tell people that they're not allowed inside, because at the moment, if they're not allowed, we just say thanks for coming. So let's say else print, sorry, you're not allowed. So they're 17 and true. Let's see what that happens. Sorry, you're not allowed and thanks for coming. So in this case, the program realized that this condition, these two conditions haven't been satisfied, so it went into the else block instead, did whatever it was supposed to do over here, and then it resumed execution afterwards. So that's pretty much if else. Now let's add another layer of complexity to this. But before we go on to that, let's just talk about boundary cases for a second. So in this example here, my number is equal to 50 and it prints my number greater than 50, and that's false. But if the person is trying to check if it's greater than or equal to 50, that's what they need to do over here. They need to put in that extra operator to make sure that they encompass all boundary cases. And with our example as well, if we said if age greater than 18, then we're leaving out all the poor 18-year-olds who are like, well, I can still get into the club. So make sure you take into account all the boundary cases. And now the layer of complexity I was talking about earlier is the Elif statement, and that's just short for else if. And here onwards, we can start giving options to the program as to what it can execute based on different outcomes. So coming back to this example, let's just presume that we want to tell people something. If their age is greater than or equal to 18 and they don't have an ID, then let's tell them, please bring your ID. Now we have another option here as well. If their age is less than 18 and they do have their ID, let's tell them that your age is not sufficient. And if they have neither of those conditions, then sorry, you're not allowed. So let's just try executing this. So they are 17, they do have their ID, but unfortunately their age is not sufficient enough to get into the club, which is why we say your age is not sufficient. So it's pretty much like giving the program different options of different outcomes. And one thing to note here is that once it's gone into one of these blocks, it doesn't come back and go into any of the others. Like once it's chosen an option, that's it. And once it's done doing whatever it's supposed to do here, it resumes normal execution from line 13. Thanks for coming. So let's try something else where they're 19, but they don't have their ID. Please bring your ID. And thanks for coming, as before. So that's pretty much the Elif statement, and that allows you to pretty much give more options to the program. Now the last thing in this module is nested if statements. So you're actually able to nest if statements inside each other in order to avoid using the Boolean operator AND. So let's just see that once again in the example here. So for example, let's just take the first if statement. If age greater than or equal to 18 and has valid ID, I want to break that up. I don't want to use the AND operator, and I want things to be a little bit more clear for myself. So how I would do that is I would first check for the age. Okay, so once I'm done checking for the age, now let me check if they have a valid ID. And if they do, I will print, welcome to the club. So that is pretty much the whole of the before statement, but it has been put in a nested if condition here. So that pretty much tells the program, okay, first check if they have the right age, and then check if they have the valid ID or not. And that's how it would come down here. So as a challenge, let's just make the whole program into incorporating nested statements. So if they have a valid ID, welcome them to the club. But if they're 18 or above and they don't have a valid ID, let's just say print, please bring your ID. So that's that taken care of. I can safely remove this condition. Now coming back here, we have done the two possible conditions inside this if block, and let's get out of this nested block and come back to the overall if. So if age is greater than or equal to 18. Now if their age is not greater than or equal to 18, it will go into the else block over here. And once again, let's check if they have a valid ID. If they do have a valid ID, tell them they're not old enough. And if they are not old enough nor have a valid ID, just say, sorry, you're not allowed. And we can safely remove these from here and just leave the print there. So let's test this out. It's the same output as before. Please bring your ID, because they are 19, but they don't have their ID. Let's try it with 18 and true. There we go, welcome to the club and thanks for coming. So with this module, we have seen that if, elif, and else are given as options to control how the program executes. So if it goes into one of the blocks, then that's it. It doesn't go into any other blocks, and it just does what it's supposed to do there and gets out into normal execution. And we can also break up the AND condition in this way into nested if statements, just in case you want to have a clearer way of figuring out your conditions. Now, there is no preference for using the AND not using the AND and using if statements, nested if instead. It's just personal preference with that. So that's if, elif, and else statements. And as we've seen in this module, you can give the program different ways and options to execute based on different outcomes. And we've also seen how we can split up an if statement into nested if statements, either to make the code a bit more readable or to do a bit more with the if statements. For example, if you want to add extra details for each of the if statements, you can break it up into nested if statements, and that just overall tells us how the flow of execution of a program can be controlled using control statements like if, elif, and else. And that's it for this module. We'll see you in the next one.